To ask why didn't these changes in these changes in strategy result in a change in public perception, or maybe they did, and that's the historiography's wrong. So that's what I wanted to dig into, and then I also wanted to, I kind of wanted to look at them in the light of the Afghanistan surge and say if that could help us kind of peer into the future, which is somewhat where we're at now, and to see if this was going to turn public opinion. I'm kind of a hybrid military/media historian, so I looked at this by looking at media products, because it doesn't matter what they want to do at the top or what really happens on the ground from the perspective of public perception. It's what people see in the media that helps them formulate their ideas about a public policy issue. So what I did was I looked at newspapers of the time, and then I also looked at like news magazines like Time, Newsweek, that were very big back then. And then of course I also looked at television, because by 1963 most people got their news from television. For a long, till about 1965, people, the news industry did not have a lot of television journalists in Vietnam. But after 1965, when Morley Safer and the crew packed up and went to Vietnam and started doing television journalism from there, that really was the dominant way people got their news about Vietnam. So what I did, there's for any media historians out there, there is a archive, a television news archive at Vanderbilt University. Some of it's online. All of NBC is online, and then you can also go there or write and get CBS broadcasts and stuff. So that's kind of the methodology. So this first big shift really happened after the Tet Offensive. For those who aren't terribly familiar with the Vietnam War, in 1965 really marks the huge buildup of of U.S. troops in Vietnam, the Americanization of the Vietnam War. And from 1965 to 1968, numbers there went from about 50,000 American troops to 500,000. So over a 3-year period, it was a huge escalation, and really it became an American war at that point. After 3 years, people's patience was starting to run out. The policy was really in shambles, and then the Tet Offensive hit. It's kind of a popular historiography that everything was going swimmingly, and then the Tet Offensive happened, and suddenly, public opinion plummeted. But the Gallup polls don't really bear that out. When you look at the Gallup polls, the Vietnam War had been becoming increasingly unpopular, and that was really kind of just the last nail in the coffin, if you will. But the kind of the famous punctuation mark in the Tet Offensive that everybody's probably already heard of, Walter Cronkite, he went to Vietnam, he filmed from Hue, and then he came back and he gave his famous speech. And at that point, public opinion was already at 35% support for the war, and it went down to 32%. So just as by way of example. So a couple of things happened. The surge, if you will, the dramatic change in strategy was kind of a rapid series of events that happened in '68. Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, resigned. General Westmoreland was kicked upstairs, just like General Casey, to be the Chief of Staff of the Army, ironically. And General Creighton Abrams, who was this guy, came on as the new general in charge of McAfee, in charge of the Vietnam War. And then in March, Lyndon Johnson announced he wasn't going to run for a second term. General Abrams, when he got on the ground, he did a couple of things. First, he said, while the people we're fighting in the Viet Cong, which was really kind of decimated, and the MVA are fighting in South Vietnam, they get their resources from North Vietnam. So we are going to concentrate on interdicting supplies coming from North Vietnam. And then he also did what Jerome Petraeus did 30, 40, 50 years later. He said, we're going to focus on protecting the population, because prior to this point, the American Army was focused on big battles. They would go out in the woods and look for the bad guys and try to build these huge set-piece battles. And the enemy stubbornly refused to be shot at. Imagine that. So that we really weren't making progress. So he said, what we need to do is we need to focus on protecting the population, because that's the only way the government's going to get legitimacy. So, and it started to have real effects, especially the supply interdiction. They were finding huge caches of and interdicting huge resupplies of weapons and ammunition and food. And whole platoons of North Vietnamese were surrendering just because they were so hungry. They couldn't get supplies. So it was having a positive effect. But as I looked at the media coverage of the event, what I found is that it wasn't being covered. And there are a couple historical reasons for this. First, Lyndon Johnson, throughout his presidency, very much discouraged the U.S. military from talking to the media. And it's kind of come through time to us as the 5 o'clock follies, where all you would get out of Vietnam every night was this one set piece discussion and whatever you could go out yourself and get from the field. So that General Abrams, when he took charge, was not really able to effectively publicize the strategy change that happened. And then also you had the 1968 presidential campaign going on, and just as is the case today, when there's a presidential election, there's not much else on the news or on television in general. So they really just got drowned out. Really, there was no change in public opinion whatsoever. It was 32% support for the war in March, and in October that was also the case. And of course, Lyndon Johnson lost the most important poll of all when the White House changed parties. So that. After President Nixon took office, he began the strategy of Vietnamization, which is we're going to focus our effort on training the South Vietnamese Army to take over the war so that we can leave. At the same time, the anti-war movement was really starting to get its legs under it. So President Nixon wanted to preemptively try to dissolve the movement before it got started. So he began to, at the same time he was announcing the Vietnamization, this is a quote from him up here at, he's in at Midway with President Tu from South Vietnam. And he's saying, President Tu says the Vietnamization's already worked so well that we can start bringing folks home. And he announced first 25,000 and then an additional 35, hoping to kind of woo away support from the anti-war movement. There was still an anti-war movement. This picture is the National Mall, the mobilization